The letter arrived on a Tuesday, 3 years after Sarah's death. James stood frozen in his kitchen, the familiar handwriting like a ghost reaching through time. "If you're reading this," it began, "I'm gone, and it's time for you to find her." Before he could process what this meant, his doorbell rang. Outside stood a woman with haunted eyes and a small suitcase. "Are you James Sullivan?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Sarah told me to find you. If this story touches your heart, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us share more stories of faith, hope, and unexpected love with others who might need them." James Sullivan had built his life around waiting. At 42, he'd spent the last 3 years in a holding pattern since losing Sarah, his wife of 15 years, to cancer. Their modest home in Millfield remained largely unchanged, her gardening book still stacked on the window seat, her favorite mug still hanging on its designated hook. Friends and family had long stopped suggesting he move on, recognizing the depth of his devotion even in her absence. What no one knew was that James wasn't just grieving, he was waiting. Sarah had made him promise something in her final days, something he didn't fully understand but had sworn to honor. "When the time comes, you'll know what to do. Just promise me you'll open your heart again." The letter that arrived that Tuesday was in Sarah's handwriting, delivered by her attorney who had been instructed to wait exactly 3 years. Inside was a single page that read, "My dearest James. Asterisk if you're reading this, I'm gone, and it's time for you to find her. I've arranged for someone to come to you, someone who needs the kind of love only you can give. This isn't a replacement for what we had, but a continuation of the love we built together. She'll arrive soon after this letter. Please, for me, open your door when she knocks, asterisk. All my love, always. Sarah." James read the letter 7 times, his hands trembling more with each reading. What had Sarah done? Who was coming? The questions swirled in his mind until the doorbell's chime cut through his thoughts. When he opened the door, he found a woman who appeared to be in her mid-30s standing on his porch. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and though her clothes were neat, they had the worn look of garments that had traveled too far for too long. But it was her eyes that struck him, deep brown and carrying a weariness that seemed to reach beyond physical exhaustion. "Are you James Sullivan?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Yes," he answered cautiously. "Sarah told me to find you." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "My name is Elena Vasquez. I don't know how to explain this." James felt a chill run through him. "You knew Sarah?" Elena nodded. "She saved my life. And she said someday you might save it again." Elena had met Sarah 3 years earlier at a cancer support group. While Sarah's diagnosis was terminal, Elena was in remission from breast cancer, though the treatments had left her unable to have children, a devastating blow to a woman who had always dreamed of motherhood. During those meetings, the two women formed an unlikely friendship that extended beyond their shared illness. What James didn't know was that Sarah had recognized something in Elena, a kindred spirit with a capacity for love that matched her own. In the final months of her life, Sarah had made arrangements, working with her attorney to ensure that when the time was right, Elena would find her way to James. "She made me promise not to contact you until 3 years had passed," Elena explained as they sat in James's living room, the letter between them on the coffee table. "I've been living in Arizona, trying to rebuild my life. But things have fallen apart recently." James listened as Elena explained how she'd lost her job 6 months ago when the small publishing company she worked for went bankrupt. Then her apartment building had been sold and converted to luxury condos, forcing her out. With her savings depleted from ongoing medical bills, she'd been staying with friends until she had nowhere left to go. "Sarah said if I ever truly needed help, I should come to you. She said you were the most generous person she'd ever known." Elena's voice faltered. "I wouldn't have come, but I didn't know where else to turn. I can leave if this is too strange." James sat in stunned silence. The whole situation felt surreal, like Sarah was orchestrating events from beyond. Yet something about Elena's presence felt right, as if a missing piece had suddenly appeared in the puzzle of his grief-stalled life. "You can stay in the guest room," he found himself saying. "At least until you figure things out." The first weeks of their arrangement were awkward. James, who had grown accustomed to solitude, found himself constantly aware of another presence in the house. Elena, conscious of being an intruder in his grief, tried to make herself as unobtrusive as possible. They established careful routines. James continued his work as a high school English teacher, while Elena used his home computer to search for jobs and apartments. They shared quiet dinners, making polite conversation that carefully avoided the deeper questions hanging between them. What exactly had Sarah intended? What kind of relationship had she envisioned between them? The turning point came one evening when James returned home to find Elena in the garden, kneeling among the overgrown beds that Sarah had once tended with such care. "I hope you don't mind," she said, looking up at him with dirt smudged across her cheek. "I noticed the perennials were struggling." James felt a tightness in his chest. Sarah loved those flowers. "I know," Elena said softly. "She told me about this garden. She said it was where she felt closest to God." Something broke open in James then, a dam of words and memories he'd held back for 3 years. As the evening light faded, they sat on the garden bench, and he told Elena everything about Sarah, not just the sanitized memories he shared with others, but the real Sarah, stubborn, occasionally short-tempered, fiercely loving, and unfailingly faithful. "She believed everything happened for a reason," he said. "Even her cancer. She said God never wastes a hurt." Elena nodded. "That sounds like her. She told me once that her greatest fear wasn't dying, but that you would stop living after she was gone." The words hit James like a physical blow. He realized with sudden clarity that he had been doing exactly that, existing, but not living. And somehow, Sarah had known. As spring turned to summer, the awkwardness between them gradually dissolved. Elena found a part-time job at the local library, which didn't pay much but gave her purpose. James began to appreciate her quiet presence, the way she hummed while washing dishes, her habit of leaving sticky notes with encouraging quotes on the refrigerator, how she remembered exactly how he took his coffee. They developed a friendship built on their shared connection to Sarah, but increasingly defined by their own interactions. James discovered that Elena was a talented writer who had abandoned her dreams of publishing a novel after her cancer diagnosis. Elena learned that beneath James's reserved exterior was a man with a dry wit and a passion for teaching that extended beyond the classroom. But beneath their growing comfort lurked unspoken complications. James sometimes caught himself looking at Elena and feeling a flicker of attraction, followed immediately by guilt. Elena, for her part, found herself caring for James in ways that went beyond friendship, but was haunted by the fear that she was merely a project, Sarah's final act of charity for both of them. The situation came to a head when James's mother came to visit for his birthday in August. Margaret Sullivan took one look at the arrangement and jumped to conclusions. "Sarah's barely cold in her grave, and you've replaced her with this stranger," she hissed to James in the kitchen, unaware that Elena could hear from the hallway. "It's not like that, Mom," James protested. "Elena was Sarah's friend. She needed help. And I suppose it's just coincidence that she's a pretty woman close to your age?" Margaret's voice dripped with disapproval. "What would Sarah think?" Elena slipped away before hearing James's response, retreating to the guest room where she began packing her few belongings. This had been a mistake. Whatever Sarah had intended, it was causing more pain than healing. When James found her an hour later, suitcase in hand, his face fell. "You heard." Elena nodded. "Your mother's right. This situation is unusual. I've imposed on your kindness long enough. Where will you go?" James asked, his voice tight. "I've saved enough for a security deposit on a small apartment." This wasn't entirely true, but Elena couldn't bear to be the source of conflict between James and his family. James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Elena had come to recognize as a sign of his frustration. "My mother doesn't get to decide who stays in my home." "But she's right about one thing," Elena said quietly. "What would Sarah think about this, about us living together, about the way things have evolved?" James was silent for a long moment. Then he walked to his desk and pulled out a small wooden box. From it, he removed another envelope, one Elena had never seen. "Sarah left this for me too. I was supposed to open it when I found myself at a crossroads. I think this qualifies." His hands trembled slightly as he broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. As he read, tears filled his eyes. Without speaking, he handed the letter to Elena. "My beloved James. If you're reading this, you've met Elena, and something has happened to make you question whether this is what I wanted. Let me be clear, it is **. I didn't send Elena to you as a replacement for me. I sent her because I know your heart, James Sullivan. You have so much love to give, and Elena has so much need to receive it. Not just romantic love, though I wouldn't object if that developed naturally, but the kind of steadfast, supportive love that has always been your greatest gift, **. Elena carries wounds that go deeper than her cancer. She needs someone who will see her strength even when she can't. You need someone who will pull you out of the past and into a future worth living for, **. I'm not playing matchmaker from beyond the grave. I'm simply introducing two people I love dearly, knowing that whatever relationship forms between you, friendship, companionship, or something more, will be a blessing to you both, **. Trust your heart, James. It has always led you true, **. All my love. Sarah." Elena looked up from the letter, tears streaming down her face. "She knew me so well," she whispered. "Better than I knew myself." James took a step toward her. "Stay," he said simply. "Not for Sarah's sake. For ours." The months that followed were a delicate dance of growing closer while respecting the ghost that had brought them together. Elena found a full-time position coordinating programs at the library and insisted on paying rent, which James reluctantly accepted. They established new routines: Sunday morning walks in the park, Friday night movies, taking turns cooking dinner. As autumn painted the trees in fiery colors, Elena finally shared the full story of her life before meeting Sarah. She had been married briefly in her 20s to a man who became abusive after losing his job. When she finally found the courage to leave him, he had stalked her relentlessly until a restraining order and the threat of jail time had forced him to back off. The cancer came 2 years later, she told James as they sat on the porch swing one evening. In some strange way, it was almost a relief. It was a problem I could fight openly, with doctors and medicine and support groups. That's how I met Sarah. James reached for her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them. Sarah never told me any of this. I asked her not to, Elena admitted. I was ashamed of staying as long as I did, of being afraid for years afterward. Sarah was the first person who made me feel like my fear wasn't weakness. It isn't, James said firmly. It's evidence of how strong you are, to have survived, to have rebuilt your life. Elena smiled sadly. Not very successfully. I was still running when I showed up on your doorstep. Maybe you were exactly where you needed to be, James suggested. Sarah always said God's timing is perfect, even when it makes no sense to us. That night, as Elena lay awake in the guest room that had become hers, she realized something had shifted. For the first time in years, she wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop, for illness to return, for security to vanish, for happiness to be snatched away. In James's home, she had found not just shelter, but a place where she could begin to trust again. Winter brought new challenges. James's school faced budget cuts that threatened the creative writing program he had built, while Elena received word that her ex-husband had been released from prison after serving time for assaulting another woman. Though there was no indication he was looking for Elena, the news reopened old wounds of fear. These external pressures pushed James and Elena closer together. They found themselves turning to each other for support, their friendship deepening into something neither could easily define. There were moments, a lingering touch, a gaze held too long, that suggested the possibility of more, but both hesitated to cross that line. For James, the barrier was guilt, not just toward Sarah, but toward Elena herself. Did he care for her because of who she was, or because Sarah had sent her? Was his growing attraction genuine, or merely the natural response of a lonely man to a kind, beautiful woman in his home? For Elena, the fear was rejection. James had loved Sarah so completely. How could anyone compete with a ghost, especially one who had orchestrated their meeting? What if James was simply fulfilling an obligation to his late wife by caring for her friend? The situation came to a head on the anniversary of Sarah's death. James had always spent the day alone, visiting her grave and then retreating into private grief. This year, he asked Elena to accompany him. They stood together before the simple headstone, James placing a bouquet of the yellow roses Sarah had loved. "I talk to her sometimes," he admitted. "Not because I think she can hear me, exactly, but because it helps me sort through my thoughts." Elena nodded. "What would you tell her today?" James was quiet for a long moment. "I'd tell her that I'm finally understanding what she wanted for me. Not to replace her, but to find a way forward." He turned to face Elena. "And I'd tell her about you, how you've brought life back into our home, how your courage inspires me, how I've come to care for you in ways I never expected." Elena's heart raced. "And what do you think she would say?" "I think," James said slowly, "she would tell me to stop hiding behind her memory and be honest with you. And with myself." The wind rustled through the cemetery trees as they stood facing each other, the moment balanced on a knife's edge of possibility. "I'm falling in love with you, Elena," James said finally. "Not because Sarah sent you, but because of who you are. And it terrifies me." Elena felt tears spring to her eyes. "It terrifies me too. I've spent so long protecting myself from hurt that I almost didn't recognize love when it appeared." "We don't have to rush anything," James said, taking her hands in his. "We can take this as slowly as we need to." Elena shook her head, a small smile forming through her tears. "I think we've been taking it slowly for months now. Maybe it's time to be brave." As they left the cemetery hand in hand, Elena glanced back at Sarah's grave. "Thank you," she whispered, not sure if she was speaking to Sarah or to God, but feeling gratitude expand in her chest like a physical presence. Spring brought renewal in more ways than one. James and Elena's relationship blossomed alongside Sarah's perennial garden. They moved cautiously at first, both aware of the unusual circumstances that had brought them together, but increasingly confident in the genuine connection they had formed.